Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Boy, the mute button just doesn't want to give it up today. Well, we finally overpowered it with a deep state conspiracy against it to remove its ability to mute me and more. All right, you get the idea. It's February 8th, Thursday, February 8th, 2018, and ready to roll on yet another edition of the Kagro in the Morning Show. Hi, welcome to it. Kagro in the Morning, live now on Daily Kos Radio. We are reminded all the way from Portland, Maine, as we are each morning, by our friend Bill. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, reenacts Trump's scalp surgery using an orange, a rusty scalpel, ooh, I've got one of those lying around, and a clump of corn silk and a nail gun. Yeah, still on this. It's the video has not stopped circulating. Everyone is amazed to see the underlying construction, the engineering undergirding the Trump hairdo, and I think we learned a little something about what was going on. And I guess it merited a tweet yesterday. One of my trademarked "he's not wrong" tweets. Maybe he was right, or the quote attributed to him in Ivana's book. Is that right? Where the scene wherein she alleges that he attacks her and in fact rapes her afterwards, and says, "Your effing doctor, your surgeon ruined me." That he had gone to see this doctor for scalp reduction surgery to remove a bald spot, which I never really heard of before. This allegation, scalp reduction surgery, and it makes a certain amount of, I guess, physical sense, but is that just, well, I'm bald on the top of my head, as many men often are, and I'm going to the doctor and he's going to cut that part of my scalp out and then yank the rest of it together and sew it up on top of my head? That'll look totally natural. Although, look at the results. I guess that's where we are. The Wind revealed, it looks like he's bald front to back in a strip all the way down, up and over his forehead, over the top of his head, and then down to his neck. And he just has 3-foot-long sideburns of sorts that he twirls around his head like cotton candy. And many people have made the same observation before, and it only makes things more ridiculous. Anyway, apparently he is speaking at the moment at the National Prayer Breakfast, and I don't know why anybody would allow that to happen, but so what? Whatever. Grab them by wherever you want, and I'm Stormy Daniels gonna... Oh, boy. Why even get into the story? Okay. Well, what can I tell you? It's bizarre and ongoing. Lots of stories to head into and dive into this morning. Greg Dworkin already providing long lists of them. Lots going on Twitter this morning. Here's an interesting one I just happened upon on Twitter this morning. It sounds like some pleasant chimes. Let's just get to that, because obviously... Well, what's the point of anything anymore? What the hell? I give up. Good morning, Greg. Welcome to your show.
How are you?
Okay, I'm fine. I see you have a long list of stories. Let's get to it. Hope Hicks is in the news again.
Yes, Hope Hicks is in the news, and a former boyfriend of hers is in the news, sorta.
She's got a lot of former boyfriends in the administration.
Yeah, well, a lot of them have a habit of hitting people, so that's part of the deal.
Wow.
So let me start off with a bunch of tweets, tweets, and a little bit of a story.
Sure. Why not?
But I think I said last night, there's a whole lot of things going on. The Nancy Pelosi 8-hour marathon, not a filibuster because it's the House, but leader privilege. We have the budget that's likely to pass today. We have the whole spectra of one House side jamming the Senate side, but in this case, the Senate jams the House, and how could that be? Because it's money, and the answer is amendments. So we could talk about that a little bit.
Okay, sure.
I mean that's a quick one, but I guess what happened is because the Senate had already passed the House CR, they added amendment to that, then sent it back to the House, and so that's how the Senate can originate something that's supposed to be in the House in the first place. And then the House has 24 hours to do something about it because the government runs out of money.
Yes. Well, that sounds fun.
So that's a classic jam, right?
That one. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. The Senate has lots of interesting workarounds. Sometimes, sometimes they're rejected and held to be out of order. But this is a pretty common one, taking any previously House-passed vehicle and changing it up with amendments and then saying, yeah, sure, it originated in the House. As a post office naming bill, sure, but that's just the way it works. For some reason, we accept that as...
Well, we accept it when we want to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been attacked before.
So if Paul Ryan says, well, we really do have to pass this, then he's not going to object to it.
Right.
And he says, he told Hugh Hewitt this morning that he has the votes. Now, what does that mean? There were two ways that he has the votes. One way is with Democratic votes, and the other way is without. So Nancy Pelosi put him on notice that counting on Democratic votes isn't going to work. And so probably what he meant to Hugh Hewitt is that even though the Freedom Caucus makes a lot of noise, in the end they fold if you push them. They will push you if you let them. But if you push them, they will fold. And that's the lesson that Boehner knew. And Paul Ryan sort of knows, but he doesn't like to exercise that very often. It looks like he'll do it this time.
Okay. Well, I'll watch, and we'll see if I can tear my eyes away from the National Prayer Breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, I did it.
Turned on just a few minutes before the show to see what was going on, and I saw Trump is speaking to the National Prayer Breakfast, and for some reason they decided to cover that, so I turned it off.
Oh. Having found that out, I said, no television for me.
Right. So here's John Harwood tweeting the big story of the day, which is that the aide to John Kelly. John Kelly, of course, is a key figure in the White House, basically because he's the president.
Yes, the moderating influence.
And he tells Trump, he's basically Trump only organized. So all of Trump's deeper, darker impulses, including white supremacy and misogyny, all that's Kelly.
I see. He admits he's bald. That's good.
But he's a general, so you're supposed to not say bad things about him because God knows why.
Right, and give him a discount on Chevys.
And since Trump is at the prayer breakfast, maybe he could tell God why. We don't know. We do know Kelly is not a grown-up in the room. He's not a moderating influence. He's as bad or worse as Trump. And it turns out that he's a hugely important figure because he makes all the important decisions. His right hand is a fellow named Rob Porter, who I guess started his career in the House or in the Congress. They know him. And so everybody was very comfortable with him. And here's the problem. He beats his wives, ex-wives, one by one. Okay. That's kind of a problem. And they sort of knew about it and didn't do anything, but then there's pictures, and now all of a sudden you have to do something because just like Black Lives Matter, if you have video on phone, it's meaningful, and if you just tell people about it, it isn't.
Yeah, although pretty soon even that goes away, but okay.
So John Harwood tweets, Rob Porter is a man of true integrity and honor, and I can't say enough good things about him, said John Kelly the night before Porter was forced to resign because the pictures came out. And several White House aides said Wednesday that Kelly's statement was a mistake.
Oh.
Right? Justin Miller reports from CNN, Porter got promoted after Kelly learned of wife-beating allegations last fall. Both the Porter was facing troubles in obtaining the clearance he needed. And remember, because he has outstanding warrants with these cease and desist orders from the wives, he couldn't get
warrants even.
complete clearance, just like Kushner can.
Yeah.
And Trump ignored all that stuff and just gave him everything. Kelly is the person who makes all the decisions. Porter is the person as staff secretary who controls what pieces of information get to Kelly and therefore Trump. So Porter sees everything. And if you don't have complete clearance but you see everything, what's wrong with that picture?
You don't have clearance. You're not supposed to see everything.
Right. So this CNN piece, which Justin Miller quotes, says, Kelly, both that Porter was facing troubles in obtaining the clearance and that his ex-wives claimed he had abused them. Yes. No action was taken to remove him from staff. Instead, Kelly and others oversaw an elevation in Porter's standing.
Right. Well, he'll punch you in the eye if you don't promote him.
Right. He was one of a handful of aides who helped draft last week's State of the Union address. He traveled instead of Kelly to the World Economic Forum last month.
Sure.
Right.
Perfect.
So, yeah, sure, perfect, exactly right. So that's a problem.
He should have punched the rest of the world's representatives in the eye.
The White House faces huge questions on Rob Porter exit, says Axios. Senior White House officials are in a state of shock and facing huge questions about their handling of the crisis over the resignation of Secretary Rob Porter and his two former wives went on the record to allege physical abuse. Why he matters? Fordo.
We'll call him Porty.
A clean-cut Harvard and Oxford standout who was chief of staff to Orrin Hatch.
Oh, terrific.
Managed and partly controlled the information flow to President Trump, including clippings and briefings. Colleagues tell me they can't reconcile the Rob Porter they know, a consummate gentleman, with the Rob Porter they're reading about with a police report and photos of a black eye by a former wife. The West Wing couldn't have handled it worse, including over-the-top statements of support for Porter before all the facts came out. The big question, who in the West Wing knew about Porter's past, uncovered months ago by the FBI while investigating Porter for security clearance? The answer is John Kelly. Watch for a glut of stories analyzing the MO and character of White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, along with speculation about consequences for him. That is to say, the knives will be out because Ivanka doesn't like him.
Ah, all right. Good. Right? Well, fine.
I added that last part, but that's what that meant. So let me just read you some tweets and comments from people along the way here to give you an idea of how this is playing. Walter Schaub, former director, Office of Government Ethics, says, so John Kelly, often touted as the White House's adult, falsely smeared a congresswoman, tells us a failure to compromise on slavery caused a civil war, called dreamers lazy, protected a wife beater. Tell us again, Press Secretary, how we're never allowed to criticize a general.
Yes.
John Weaver, this was Kasich's old advisor. Trump attracts the best people, spies, traitors, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, dolts, low travelers, and now honorable wife beaters. Quite a record, General Kelly. Quite a record. Peter Wehner. This is disgraceful. It tells us so much about Porter, who's credibly accused of abusing his ex-wives, about Kelly, whose defense of Porter is unconscionable, and about the Trump ethos in the White House. They treat women in horrible, dehumanizing ways.
What? No one has more respect for women than Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Kelly said something about putting them on a pedestal and stuff like that. I guess that you can easier beat them. I don't know.
Hitting them with a pedestal, I think, is what he meant.
Or hitting them on a pedestal.
Right.
Or hitting on them when they're on a pedestal. It's hard to know exactly what they're talking about.
All kinds of hitting, whatever we got.
Stuart Stevens says, has any White House chief of staff managed to defend slavery and praise a wife beater in just 6 months on the job?
It is an impressive record.
Right. And David Frum has also an impressive record. Listen to this. A senior White House aide with a history of domestic violence. Another who was discovered to have an open arrest warrant for a gun crime. That was Seb Gorka.
Yes.
At least two others very obviously dealing with substance abuse problems. I'm not sure who he means. The most flagrantly and routinely dishonest White House press operation in history, a chief of staff who publicly repudiated the principle of civilian control of the military, an undisclosed foreign agent as national security advisor, that advisor credibly implicated in a plot to kidnap a U.S. resident on U.S. soil, lies on the financial disclosures and security clearance applications of the president's nepotism appointments to the White House staff. A White House drug czar who previously worked as the opioid industry's top apologist in the House of Representatives, a chief of staff to the drug office who falsified his resume and was fired from his previous job for not showing up. That's a pretty good summary of what's going on here.
Yeah, and we've missed a few even.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an ongoing thread. Maybe I'll have more. So the whole idea here is that when we said that Trump is incompetent and he is not up to the job and there is no way in hell he should be in the White House, this is what we're talking about. Turns out we were right. Yeah, he won, but that doesn't validate everything. Sorry, press secretary, that's not how it works. And the thing is that it's now out in the open. And so the knives are going to come out. And one of the smarter commenters sort of looked at this and said, so Don McGahn, who's supposed to be the White House counsel to protect the White House on this sort of thing, and John Kelly probably are going to be knifing each other in the back for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, that'll be fun.
Who's responsible for this? Who should have known about this? Whose fault was it? Yours. No, yours.
Yeah. Well, plenty to go around.
Plenty to go around. Well, it's
Amazing.
both. And so the speculation, therefore, is, well, what happens? And the answer is probably nothing, because the White House is so dysfunctional they can't afford to lose the president, which is to say John Kelly.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see whether maybe Ivanka really is the most influential Jewish woman in America.
Yes, and if she fires Kelly, what that means is that the U.S. doesn't have a president.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. We could probably do without.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me, though, as you were reading over the list, that Sebastian Gorka, you're right. You pointed out that he's got an open warrant for his arrest in Hungary for. Did you mention that it was for gun crime?
Yeah,
I'm not certain. Yeah, okay. I know that.
Yeah,
that
well, when we talked about the gun crime thing, I said that's a.
Yes. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So there we have it. I just wanted to point out that Sebastian Gorka, wanted on an open warrant for his arrest in Hungary for gun crimes, has immigrated to this country only to commit more gun crimes here. I just wanted to point that out. He was arrested trying to board a flight at Dulles Airport with a gun in his luggage or in his pocket.
Because who can remember?
Yeah, a year or two ago. Yeah, you can't keep track of these things. I just wanted to point out that sometimes maybe Hungary isn't sending its best, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, so many guns, can't remember where they all are.
Right, and that's, it's a common thing. For whatever reason, we find, 50 guns a day on people. Oops, I forgot. Walking into the airport, even though pretty well known as a no-gun zone, but okay. Anyway, we can move on. I just wanted to point out that the immigrant crime is rampant.
Okay, so just to mention a couple other people here. This is the Vanity Fair piece I just threw it at the bottom of the list I send you, so you can find it easy. It's by Gabe Sherman. Beyond disbelief, John Kelly's defense of Rob Porter roils the West Wing. Staff Secretary Rob Porter, who has been accused of abusing his former wives as Kelly's right hand and dating Hope Hicks, one of Trump's closest confidants, who, by the way, was also dating Corey Lewandowski. Himself was accused of molesting a reporter physically, that is to say, grabbing her and twisting her and giving her a rope burn on her wrist. And Corey Lewandowski, from the article we were talking about the other day, was mentioned because Ivanka Trump is unhappy with Kelly and other people who aren't protecting her father enough, and they want to bring some killers into the White House.
Oh, on top of the
ex-staff who are really into protecting Trump.
I see.
And we mentioned some of that, from the previous campaign. They want to bring the campaign people back in, the chaotic campaign that was awful. And one of the people they want to bring in is Corey Lewandowski, Hope Hicks' ex-boyfriend, who is got a history of assaulting reporters.
Well, her new boyfriend's gone, and, she's a very busy woman. She has to date at work. And
she dates people who not only hit on people, but hit people.
Yes, but they're so easily available. She works a lot. They got to have people on staff that she can date. And if Rob Porter is gone, she's going to have to bring back Lewandowski. She's a very powerful woman, the most powerful person. We don't know how she does it in America.
But Kelly's declaration that Porter is a man of true integrity and honor was seen as deeply tone deaf. So the White House is unhappy with Kelly's statement and his handling of this crisis, shall we say.
Yes.
And however efficient Kelly is behind closed doors, he's pretty bad when you put him in front of the camera. He almost always says something that makes you cringe. And we read the list there, from defending slavery as the source, or denying that it was the cause of the Civil War, or attacking a congressman for lying when the congressman was telling the truth and he wasn't. Yeah. You name it.
I'm particularly offended by the general not understanding the cause of war.
Yeah, that is kind of a tough one there.
Come on.
It's kind of like his day job,
Right. Seriously, man. I know it's an old war, but you're an old general.
And now Kelly, says Gabe Sherman, and now Kelly's in the midst of a bona fide crisis, one that exacerbates the president's own Me Too problems.
Aww.
On Tuesday, Kelly strongly defended White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter against disturbing allegations first published in the Daily Mail that he abused his ex-wives. Kelly's decision to back Porter has left many people inside the White House angry, two sources with knowledge of the matter said. And then Axios reported Kelly wanted Porter to stay and fight.
Oh, but, not fight.
Yeah, well, you don't know.
Yeah, I'm not really certain. Maybe they have a Fight Club thing going on.
Maybe he wanted Porter to hit a reporter, preferably a female reporter. You don't know what he meant.
Reporter.
So yesterday, Porter's second wife, Jennifer Willoughby, told the Mail, Daily Mail, that Porter called her an effing bitch on their honeymoon and once pulled her naked out of the shower. In response, Kelly put out a statement calling Porter a man of true integrity and honor.
Yes.
And a trusted professional. But shortly after Kelly rallied behind his colleague, Porter's first wife came out forward with additional harrowing allegations, cold beholderness. So that was the second wife that had said that. But the first wife, who married Porter in 2009, told the Daily Mail that Porter punched her in the face and choked her, among other alleged abuses, and included a photo of her with a black eye. It wasn't hard enough for me to pass out, but it was scary, humiliating, and dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Porter said the allegations were slanderous and simply false, and I didn't totally understand his defense because he said he was the one that took those pictures, therefore he couldn't be guilty.
Okay, I guess that makes sense at Harvard. I don't know.
But whatever. Sources said Kelly was so quick to defend Porter because the two have grown very close since Trump appointed Kelly chief of staff. Porter, a Rhodes Scholar, has helped Kelly instill discipline in the West Wing. I wonder how. Kelly has told people that Porter had a calming effect on White House operations.
What?
Well, if you choke somebody so that they can't talk, you're not going to be yelling at anybody, right?
Beat the crap out of you. All right.
For instance, it's Porter who screens all the information that gets to Trump's desk. Porter helps Kelly conduct a West Wing organizational study that provided Kelly with the cudgel to sideline Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. Mm-hmm. The officials also said Kelly supported Porter even after the FBI delayed granting Porter security clearance because they uncovered his alleged history of spousal abuse.
As that happens, they do that.
Yeah, until now, Porter has been a low-profile player, publicly absent from the West Wing dramas, but last week he emerged with this Daily Mail stuff. Then on Tuesday, Sherman said it better than I did, but I'm just abbreviating for everybody. And then on Tuesday, the paper contacted the White House with questions about Porter's alleged battery.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, ever ready?
Huh.
According to one person briefed on internal White House conversations, Kelly let it be known he wanted to defend Porter publicly. In a series of crisis meetings, a statement was drafted by Hicks, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Kushner's White House spokesman Josh Raffel. Porter, Hicks, and Raffel attended a dinner last week that was reported in the Daily Mail piece. The White House did not respond to requests for comment. Even before the blowback from the Porter statement, the White House was struggling to walk back Kelly's inflammatory comments on immigration. Yesterday, Kelly said on Capitol Hill some undocumented immigrants were too lazy, and we talked yesterday about the whole too lazy history, 400-year history of that.
Yes.
Trying to figure out who is able-bodied and who not, which is to say who is deserving and who is not. So you have a Kelly who sidelined Ivanka and Jared, and therefore Jared not particularly happy with Kelly, and then all this other stuff happening. And by the way, it all points the focus to Me Too stuff that always comes back to Donald Trump. And so, not good for the White House, and they have to figure out what to do about it, which is hard because the people in the middle of trying to figure out what to do about it are the ones who figure out what to do.
Yeah.
Normally you'd like to have somebody outside, higher level, look at that and say, look, this is what you have to do. You can't do that when it's like you.
No. That is tough.
There's no way they're going to be objective about it.
No. He's been a bust, I will say that. I mean, it was pretty quickly obvious that he was just a terrible person.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Jinx. We were talking about that weeks and weeks and weeks ago, months ago.
Yeah.
And couldn't understand this whole thing about, well, Kelly's the grown-up and this, that, and everything else. The person of all of the cabinet members, and maybe the only cabinet member, who has conducted himself in a reasonable fashion is Mattis over at defense. And that's maybe because he's in his natural environment doing what he's actually trained to do.
I guess so. Although,
I mean, you may not agree with a lot of the stuff he does, but you could see it as a very straightforward, conventional, Department of Defense who wants to increase military spending. But, that's their job. Get that.
Right.
Everybody else has pretty much disgraced themselves.
He's certainly, I guess, off the top of my head, the least noted for absurdity or corruption. Although he's now, I think, found himself, he's now planted in the middle of the military parade thing. And I guess if that doesn't come off, then he'll bolster his credentials as an adult. But he's been a cheerleader for it because he has to be. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't rise to the level of some of these other cabinet secretaries and what they've been up to. So we'll
not
let that
close,
stand.
So he's like standard issue.
He doesn't pocket any of the parade money, as far as I know.
Yeah. And, what's his job? Look, he doesn't want a parade. It was fantastic listening to Colonel Jack Jacobs and many of the other military people who were analyzing this. Jack Jacobs was just so straightforward about this.
Yeah.
They asked him, so what do you think of this whole parade idea? And he just looked at the camera and said, this sucks. Look, if
Okay.
you're a soldier, you hate this. It is the most god-awful, stupid idea ever. It takes months of training to do the parade right. It takes you away from your real job. We don't have the resources. We don't have the soldiers. If you want to honor veterans, the best way to do this, he said, is to have the civilians do the damn parade and let the veterans watch from the sidelines and eat popcorn.
Or let the veterans march, just walk out there.
Right. This is a ridiculous use of people's time, and it's terrible. I mean, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm probably mildly paraphrasing what he actually said. And I heard that from a bunch of other military folks who said parades are just stupid and not a good use of the military's time, effort, and everything else. Forget about the, North Korea, ego wants a parade stuff. Just the whole idea of it is just bad for the military.
It's pretty dumb, sounds like all around. Even John Philip Sousa himself has come back with Frederick Douglass. They're both being recognized more and more these days to say it was a stupid idea. That's how dumb it is. Even he doesn't want a parade. He loves a parade.
Right, but see, the whole point here is he would love to be able to use this for two reasons. One is that, he likes people, marching in front of him so he gets to review them.
Yes.
But he'd also love to drive yet another wedge between his base and the rest of the country. It doesn't work that way because military people who make up a large part of his base think it's a stupid idea. So it doesn't work on that regard. It doesn't work on that level. Only works on the ego level.
Yeah. Well.
Which is a point I think doesn't get made often enough. When commentators look at this, this is a really smart thing to do. We'll get to Nancy Pelosi and after the break maybe and talk about that coming up. Mm-hmm. But this is a smart thing to do because it's only going to rally his. He's not thinking.
No, he rarely
all of the
is.
stuff that you tell people is smart for him to do has nothing to do with being smart. He does it because he wants, and then you find reasons for why you think it's smart later. It ain't him planning.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Hey, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us on the other side of our break. We went in with the spectacle of the maybe upcoming military parade. I think we've pretty much covered all the bases on that. The military themselves upset and annoyed at having to do it. Nobody particularly enthusiastic about it, although it does make for a great stupid distraction wedge issue, as you pointed out. As the Republicans almost immediately are on a "why do you hate the military" kick, as opposed to, this "why do we hate the military for wasting their time and money on a parade?" But okay, so that's deplorable values for you, and no serious surprise there. It's just draw a deep, sharp breath and see if anybody can talk him out of it. I think it's been about 6 months since he came up with the idea, and he forgot about it during that time. He wanted one for his inauguration. People didn't talk to him about it, so he forgot. Then he went to France. Then people didn't follow up on his demands to emulate that, and they forgot. 6 months later, I guess it's come up again, and I'm sure there's people in the White House hoping that he'll forget about it again for another 6 months.
Mm.
We'll see.
So speaking of wedge issues,
yes,
I would like to introduce you to the minority leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi.
That's very wedge.
And if you don't know who she is, you had 8 hours to find out yesterday.
How could you not?
She did a remarkable thing. In fact, articles. This is an article in the Fix in the Washington Post today. A House filibuster like the one Nancy Pelosi gave hasn't happened in more than a century. Actually, it's not a filibuster because it's the House.
Right.
And it's never happened in the sense that it's the longest speech ever in the House. I think she talked for 8 hours and 10 minutes when she took the floor for her 1 minute speech and refused to yield. But only
1 minute.
Only the leaders can do that.
Yes.
So when you look to say, well, who else did that? There aren't very many people who could, and there's even less people who would.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. Ordinarily, there's no. I don't know if there's even a rule, but it's just sort of practice that when the party leaders sort of give each other that leeway, and you don't gavel one of them down.
Right. So here's a little interesting history in this article. Technically, she broke the rules by even seizing the floor that long.
There we go.
The House more or less banned filibusters in the 1890s, said congressional rules expert Joshua Hooter at Georgetown University. Filibusters used to be a frequent thing, but a particularly nasty partisan fight changed that. In the 1890s, the majority party was frustrated that the minority party was holding up negotiations by refusing to provide a quorum. Minority members would sit there silently, not responding to the quorum call. So they were put in the ledger as not present even though they were standing in the chamber. And the majority party did what majority parties do, right? They changed the rules.
Yeah.
You cannot slow down debate.
That's the way it goes now.
Yeah, the House is a majority rule place, so whatever rule the majority wants to pass, it can, which means minority parties have had to find creative ways to hold up negotiations, and filibusters have happened. In 1909, James Beauchamp, Champ Clark of Missouri, held the floor for 5 hours and 15 minutes to speak against a tariff, but the purest sense, not even that comes close to what Pelosi did. The historian's office said, it's important to note that although Clark held the floor for the duration, he was repeatedly interrupted during his remarks.
Okay.
So the only time, according to the Washington Post team who saw this, the only time that Nancy Pelosi was interrupted is she took time to unwrap a mint several hours in.
Okay, that doesn't.
She kept talking for 8 hours straight. She was telling dreamer stories. She was talking about biblical references. And the reason she was allowed to speak at all, I just think this is interesting from a process point of view. I'm not telling David anything that he doesn't know, but I think the audience sometimes likes process sidebars here. Congress gives deference to the leaders of each party. So she and House Speaker Paul Ryan each get to speak longer than the 1 minute allotted. It's not unusual in really passionate moments for these leaders to stretch the 1 minute to 45. Now, Pelosi at 77 may also be one of the oldest lawmakers to conduct such a lengthy filibuster. She's got to be one of the first, if not the first, doing it while wearing 4-inch heels.
You don't even need to really wear those, I don't think, to do that.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, and this gets back to the whole thing about majority rule in the House, as David has pointed out countless times for people listening to the show. When you hold the gavel, you can do an awful lot of stuff, and when you don't hold the gavel, especially in the House, there's very little you can do. So the Senate gets together and they decide they're going to pass a 2-year budget. It's got good stuff in it for Democrats. It's got good stuff in it for Republicans. It's going to blow a hole in the debt, but Republicans don't really care. Jones called them deficit peacocks for years. It's true. They don't really care about it, so that's not a problem. And then they're going to jam the House and send it at the last minute, as we talked about earlier in the show. And what the problem there is that it doesn't include anything about Dreamers and DACA. So what are Democrats going to do about it? It's the House. They can't do anything about it. And you can slice and dice it any way to now and forever, and you can give lectures about how the Democrats should do this or they should do that. There's nothing they can do. They know it. And so Nancy Pelosi took the floor to make this a point of honor, a point of information. She's not going to shame the Republicans into doing the right thing, but it's the only thing Democrats can do.
That's true
so
for the House Dems. Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, you might question why, and ultimately you may come to the conclusion that it's, I guess, to really put the lamest point forward as possible on it is to say, well, it's just symbolic. Yeah. Okay. Well, it is. And yet stories, people want their stories told and told to the widest public possible. And she says, well, I may not be able to stop this, but if you want your stories told in the hopes that someone somewhere will look on you favorably and sympathetically, well, I'll do it. I'm the only one that can do this now and tell these stories and garner attention for it, so I will.
Yeah, and, the purely political part of it is just a matter of numbers. We are going to lose because we don't have enough votes in the House to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to declare for the world for 8 hours and make people cover this. We can say it, but then they just don't pay attention because they're interested in the prayer breakfast.
Right.
But we're going to say it for 8 hours and make you cover this. And we're going to tell you why we're doing it. We're doing it because we support you, and now everybody knows we support you. That's as much as we could do. And if you were wondering whether we support you, we just told you we were for 8 hours. And the whole country's going to know it because they're going to have to cover my 8-hour stunt here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this is.
Yeah. Well, that's well put. Yeah. It's become an event in itself now, and they almost, by accident, in order to cover the event, they have to tell people what she talked about, and they might as well fill the story with reprints of the stories she told. And so now it's that much more effective. It doesn't stop the vote, but was never going to happen.
Right. It's never going to happen, and we're going to lose. And so for everybody saying, well, it's only symbolic, or you should have done what? What else are you supposed to do? You don't have the vote. So Pelosi's telling people, I get it. I get that you're unhappy about it. I share your unhappiness and passion so much so that I'm going to speak about it for 8 hours. And the only thing that you could do about it is come out and vote in November or sooner if you happen to have sooner elections. Mm. And there's a lot of that going on. There's a special coming up in Pennsylvania next month. And here I have this piece from Iowa Starting Line, new post, why a former Republican corrections officer drove through a snowy night to his first Democratic Iowa caucus. People switch parties both ways constantly, said one of the commenters. Mark Masterson, adding to the piece, said, I don't know how many people switch parties in Henry County to Democrats, but I saw several. And I'm just saying. So the small things happen first. Democrats filling all the slots to run against Republicans, which hadn't been done before, raising money, winning specials, coming close and losing specials in highly conservative areas, and it all builds to November. And that's what Pelosi is trying to keep going with that 8-hour speech, even though you're going to still lose the vote.
Yeah. Well, it's a long way to November. Have to occupy the time somehow.
Right. Here's a piece. It's going to be my second last piece, maybe, before I'm done. And got to scoot off to work. It's all icy now, so I got to give myself some extra time to get there without getting into any accidents on the way, because we like to drive safe.
Yeah, you haven't got time for that.
White women in the Rust Belt are turning on Trump, says Ron Brownstein.
Well, they always do.
Support from majorities of white working-class women. Well, this stuff with Kelly isn't going to help any.
Oh, this is the other way. Okay, yeah, all right.
Support from majorities of white working-class women powered Trump's Midwestern wins, but these voters are souring on him in office, providing Democrats with a complicated opportunity in 2018. Oh. A massive new measure of state-by-state attitudes towards Trump offers important clues about the pressure points that could tip the 2018 elections. Last week, Gallup released Trump's average approval ratings in all 50 states, based on more than 171,000 survey interviews it conducted. Okay.
That's a lot of surveys.
Compilation puts Trump's average national approval rating for 2017 at 38%. I think it's close to the 40% Gallup recorded for him this week. Throughout the year, Gallup found Trump average majority approval in just 12 states.
No.
In 9 states that he carried, this is Trump states, in 2016, he managed an approval rating of 43 or less. New Hampshire and Nevada, both at 42, were the only 2 of the 20 states Hillary Clinton carried where Trump's approval rating peaked above 37.
That's a low approval rating.
Yeah. So to better illuminate patterns of Trump's strengths and weaknesses, Gallup provided the Atlantic with more finely grained demographic results in 13 battleground states where there are enough interviews. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and Colorado. These findings underscore both the persistence of the demographic divides over Trump and the continuing tug of regional variance. With congressional elections increasingly pivoting on voter attitudes toward the president, both dynamics will frame the battle. Unlike a comparable compilation from SurveyMonkey, which found some gains for Trump with non-white voters, the Gallup data shows Trump still failed to make inroads with them in none of the 13 states did more than 23% of minorities say they approve of Trump's performance last year. And some of those are just pro forma because it's the president, you're supposed to respect it. Among whites, the results show the persistent power of both class and gender in driving the reaction. In all 13 states, white men and women with a college degree gave Trump a lower approval rating than their counterparts. That's been Brownstein's thing all along, identifying that non-college and college is a huge split. But in each state, Trump's approval rating was considerably lower among white women than white men at the same level of education. And those twin forces, class and gender, have established a sharp continuum of white attitudes toward Trump. White men without a college degree remain his foundation, but the pillar is showing some cracks. Relative to his 2016 vote, Trump's approval rating in 2017 declined in all 13 states. Now, he had a commanding initial position, so it's a very strong hold. He's got 60%. But at the opposite poll, college-educated women remain the engine of white resistance. In only 4 of the 13 states that Trump's approval among college, and these are swing states, I'll remind you, that Trump's approval among college-educated white women exceed an anemic 34%. So white-collar suburbs are a key. If you're running for Congress in those places, Trump's poor approval rating is your key to get in. That's basically the story there.
Okay.
So you'll see, well, Trump's ticked up in the polls recently. He has, but not enough to matter. Yeah, he went from 38 to 40 in Gallup. There's other polls showing him at 40. That is still historically low.
Yes, but he's very proud of it somehow.
Yeah, well, Rasmussen shows him, higher, but it's Rasmussen. The other polls are all showing an uptick. But G. Elliott Morris had a really, really interesting look at the generic ballot the other day. Mm-hmm. He looked at all the generic ballots available since time began, that is to say, since they were measuring it, and then looked at this year's. And what he saw is that there's always a bump in the generic approval for the other party in January.
Yeah.
Which is what we're seeing here. And then it goes back down to what it was.
Okay.
So, and this year, it's following the same thing. It's just that it's a lot lower, the Republicans, than normal. So Democrats continue to do well even with the recent uptick in the generic ballot. Democrats continue to do well in terms of looking at Trump's own popularity, which is to say non-existent, even with the recent uptick. So you have the polls, but you also have the people running, you have the specials, you have the election results that we've seen so far with Democrats overperforming the polls. We have the observation we made yesterday that a lot of the polls tend to be wrong because they don't know how to properly account for who's a likely voter, because you got new people voting that normally don't, and partly that's because of Trump resistance. So you put it all together, and Democrats are still in a reasonably strong position. Nothing's a guarantee, but there's nothing to get depressed about when you see the polls and when you see all of this data. So with that, I will leave you and scoot off to work. But all eyes are going to be on John Kelly today because the knives are going to be out for him. So I'm just saying.
All right. Well, he's supposed to be trained in how to deal with knives.
I suppose, and to remember the old Monty Python routine also, what to do when you're attacked by a banana or other kind of fruit. And so, raspberries and other things. So we'll see. I mean, it's all going to play out, but none of it's good for the White House. Take care. And I will talk to you again on Monday.
All right. We'll do that. We'll see if John Kelly's still in the White House and look forward to his swift resignation. I wonder who's going to, who would replace him were he to finally be forced out. And let's see. So he's actually held 2 administration jobs. If he were to be bumped out, I wonder if anybody's held 2 and been removed from, or, shifted from 2 jobs so quickly inside of a single administration. I don't know. We'll see if that is a record, and check in on all the other fun things happening around the world and around the country. I was a little curious about Rob Porter and where he came from in general and what is his background. And it's always impressive when you hear that somebody is it's meant to be. We're meant to react in a certain way when we hear, a Harvard graduate and a Rhodes Scholar. So no joke at that. Although I do note, I just was, looking around and poking in Wikipedia and see, well, what do we know about the guy? Not too much available there, but I'm always intrigued when the person's parents, or at least one parent, has a Wikipedia entry of their own, or if some other family member has their own Wikipedia entry. Oh, let's see here. Do we know? Porter was preceded by Joni Walsh as White House staff secretary. Does that mean that she was Joni Walsh? I don't recognize the name. Is that Obama's staff secretary, or was there another interim staff secretary before they settled on Porter? I don't know. But yeah, we do note from his Wikipedia entry he was chief of staff for Utah Senator Orrin Hatch. And I guess I just began to wonder, like, well, why was he that? Well, he went to Harvard. He was a Rhodes Scholar. It's just interesting to read. And sometimes you get a little bit of insight even reading these cursory biographies, and you begin to say, oh, I see how this happened. Let's see. Porter, like, okay, why is he the chief of staff to Orrin Hatch from Utah? Porter grew up in Belmont, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C., a creature of Washington himself then. After graduating from high school, Porter interned in the U.S. Senate. That does sometimes happen, especially if you graduate from high school in Washington, D.C. He attended Harvard University, where he studied government and was president of the Harvard Republican Club. After his freshman year at Harvard, he began a 2-year stint as a Mormon missionary in London. Aha. Oh, okay. Orrin Hatch, Utah, Mormon. Not from Utah, but Mormon. And I guess a little bit, well, I don't know, Massachusetts. That is interesting, too. It just puts me in mind of Mitt Romney, who somehow has been flitting between the two his entire life, and California on top of all that. So, after his freshman year at Harvard, he began a 2-year stint as a Mormon missionary in London, another hardship post, speaking of Mitt Romney. During the summer of his junior year, Porter completed an internship at the White House and worked for the Domestic Policy Council. He graduated in 2002. So, okay, not like an outstanding young man with an outstanding resume. I mean, we know he's not an outstanding young man or old man now. He's 40. He's not old. But he's a wife beater, so he's not that outstanding. But, the credentials are sort of there, right? But take note of all these things. Harvard University, studied government, president of the Harvard Republican Club, interned at the White House, worked for the Domestic Policy Council. He graduated in 2002. Porter was a Rhodes Scholar, studying political theory at the University of Oxford, where his thesis focused on C.S. Lewis, interestingly enough. Some career information here. Porter served as chief of staff for Orrin Hatch from March of 2014 onward. He also worked for Senators Rob Portman, which could only have been hugely confusing. Rob Portman, meet Rob Porter. Rob Porter, Rob Portman. Hi, good to meet you. He also worked for Mike Lee, another, not far afield from Orrin Hatch there. But okay, he resigned from his position as White House staff secretary way back on February 7th, 2018. I love the way Wikipedia is updated already with that. Following public allegations, the allegations. I was kind of struck by the names of the wives, too. Just very white names. Colby Holderness, Jennifer Willoughby. But okay, we can leave those aside. Let's see. So here's where things begin to make a certain amount of sense, I guess. I noticed over on the right, the little box that they have on Wikipedia about personal details, that his father had his own Wikipedia entry. And of course, they get down to it here in the personal life section. We'll start by reading there. Remember all of the impressive credentials, not a whole load of them, but some pretty good ones out there, begin to make a little bit more sense. Like you wonder, well, I thought, say, Harvard grads, Rhodes Scholars were smart people, and smart people, you hope, are too smart to believe that it would be acceptable for them to be physically abusive with their spouses, but that never bars anything, and we're constantly being surprised by otherwise smart and otherwise outwardly, I'm sure, to other appearances, honorable and accomplished people who in their private lives are just maniacs. They just never grew up correctly. They didn't learn the boundaries of what you are and aren't able to do. Who knows? Maybe his own parents' home was abusive. I couldn't tell you. But these sorts of things, make themselves evident every once in a while. Okay. So who's his dad? His dad is Roger Porter. Does it ring any bells for you? It doesn't for me, but as it turns out, it gives a new spin, puts a new light, let's say, on Rob Porter's, relatively accomplished sort of career for a 40-year-old. Not, top tier necessarily, but pretty good highlights. Harvard, Rhodes Scholar. What else was there? He interned at the White House, worked for the Domestic Policy Council, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so his dad, Roger Porter, is a former aide to President George H.W. Bush. That'll help when you're interested, say, in interning in the White House of George W. Bush, right? It wasn't like you can imagine George W. Bush sitting there and with his feet up on the Resolute desk and saying, where's the best and brightest? Where can I get me some really interesting and intelligent interns? Harvard. That's a big deal. I went to Yale myself, but sometimes we like to give affirmative action breaks to the Harvard boys. Who do you got? Who's on the phone? Oh, it's my dad. Hey, Dad, how you doing? Good, whatever. I have this guy who used to work for me and his son, and you know how this stuff works. We're big into the my son thing, my other son, governor of this one, my other one, other one, drug addict and scam artist, whatever. But the point is, we're big on sons, and one of my former aides has a son who's at Harvard, and he wants to be an intern. Can he do it? Yeah, sure, no problem. So, Roger Porter worked for the Bush family while they were in the White House and arranged for his son Rob to work for the Bush family while they were in the White House. But still, Harvard University, right? No slouch. Roger, when he's not working in the White House with George H.W. Bush, is professor of business and government at Harvard University. Isn't that interesting? And so his son magically goes to Harvard University and majors in government. He is also, by the way, housemaster at Harvard Residential Dormitory Dunster House. That will mean something, I'm sure, to Harvard types, more than it means to me, but okay. Porter, of course, we know the latest allegations. They note that he is twice divorced, raised as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and also noted here in Wikipedia, Porter's been dating White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. How does she do it? That is to say, how does she show up at work without a black eye? I don't know. I guess it would just be too high profile. He doesn't punch up, he punches down, I guess. I note, for instance, when the FBI was, no doubt, pressing him about whether or not he abused his former wives, he didn't punch any FBI directors or any FBI agents. That would just have gotten him in trouble. All right. Let's see. So some other interesting facts about Roger Porter. Now we have to flip over to his profile in order to get those on record. American professor, currently serving as the IBM professor of business and government at Harvard University, where his son went. Master of Dunster House, which, we could read about that, but who cares? Also, senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., which sounds nice. On the board of directors of Zions Bank Corporation, which will raise eyebrows among conspiracy-minded people everywhere, a large bank holding company headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. Wow. Why Salt Lake City? Because Porter, that is to say Roger Porter, grew up in Utah, Iowa, and New York, and attended BYU, Brigham Young High School. And then he also, of course, attended BYU, Brigham Young University, for 2 years and was a member of the varsity men's tennis team. That's nice. Before serving as a mission in the UK as a missionary. So, gee whiz, where should I go for my mission, Dad? How about where I went? Okay, fine. And you could get into BYU if you want, but I'm now a professor at Harvard. Why don't we just send you there? But, the kid did well at Harvard. He was, of course, selected as a Rhodes Scholar, which is weird also because his dad was also a Rhodes Scholar and a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. I don't see that Rob was able to hold up that end of the bargain. I don't know. I imagine, like, Rhodes Scholarship. Well, by the way, why aren't Rhodes Scholarships, like, disfavored in terms of, like they're named after Cecil Rhodes? That's bad. We don't like that. He was a virulent racist and founder of apartheid and states. And I just not really sure why we haven't purged that. Maybe it's just not in our control. But are Rhodes Scholars, do they give any value at all in selecting Rhodes Scholarship candidates to legacy people? I don't know that that's actually an issue in the same way as it is with admissions to elite universities, for instance. But I've never heard that, but I guess I wouldn't be terribly surprised. He may very well have earned it in his own right. I find that interesting. But by way of career information, just before we head out on the break, I thought I would read about Roger's career here. Roger was selected as a White House Fellow and served as Special Assistant to the President and Executive Secretary to the President's Economic Policy Board. So he's got some secretarial experience in the Ford White House. Joined the faculty at the John F. Kennedy School of Government in Harvard in 1977. He returned to government service in Reagan's administration, serving as Executive Secretary of the Cabinet Council on Economic Affairs and Director of the White House Office of Policy Development. Went back to Harvard at some point, including the time during which his son would have been in attendance there, it appears. And then, let's see, goes on to do a whole bunch of other fun stuff. But it does seem like maybe he was able to make the path forward for his son just a little bit easier than the rest of us might find it, including working at the Domestic Policy Council where his son landed his internship. How interesting is that? We'll be right back after this break. Hey, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's just our short 1 minute top of the hour break. So I guess we could just jump right back to it, but I'm pretty much done making my points from out of Wikipedia. But in case I didn't make that entirely clear, it's of some interest. I mean, Roger Porter wasn't there any longer, but it's just, again, an item of note that in his brief and privileged career, Rob Porter managed to wangle an internship at the White House working for the Domestic Policy Council in the George W. Bush administration, whereas in another amazing coincidence, his father's last stint in public office was as director of the Domestic Policy Council for George H.W. Bush. So, golly, it's all just so hard to understand. I just thought I'd throw that out there in terms of setting the table for probably yet another discussion of amazing white privilege. This is where's my echo? Can I set up an echo? Thinking annals of amazing white privilege. We'll get a little theme music, maybe a trumpet flourish, and make it a regular feature on the show. All right, let's see. Other stories that have captured the attention of millions this morning on Twitter. Let's see. This was an interesting one that I was going to just blurt out before, at the top of the show, before Greg made his entrance, in case you were wondering if I was ever going to get back to this one. So just sort of an oddball exchange I found here. Chuck Woolery. Yeah. Chuck Woolery has got a bug up his, can we say bug up his ass? I think so. We're a podcast now, we can say that. About something. Chuck Woolery, in case you were wondering, like, you talking about the game show host guy? Yes. Former host of Love Connection. I forgot exactly what it was that he actually hosted, but he was a game show host, and that's sort of an interesting thing there. And I guess he's now a he now hosts a, what? Is it a podcast? Is it a show? Is it a video thing? I don't know, but called Blunt Force Truth, along with somebody else, I guess. But anyway, that's his outfit now. And he was retweeting himself, I guess, yesterday, or tweeting out a link to his blog for Blunt Force Truth at bluntforcetruth.com. Here's the bug that he had. A 26-year-old mayor of bankrupt city, he tweets, will give free money to the poor, implement, quote, universal basic income. And I don't know. He complains about it, I'm sure, in this article. It is linked therein. They have a picture of the mayor about whom they are speaking. He is not identified by name in the tweet, but he is just coincidentally identified by his photograph as a 26-year-old, therefore young black male. Uh-oh, you know what those young black males are up to when they get their hands on money. Boy, they're crazy, obviously, meant to drive his conservative fans up the wall, and it did. Lots of people responding to his tweet with all sorts of inappropriate commentary, but there's been an answer posed to this thing, and it's posed by the person who actually is the mayor of the city in question, which is apparently no longer bankrupt. It's Michael Tubbs, who took to Twitter with his verified account to point out for Mr. Willery, well, first of all, he's 27 years old, not 26, but that makes a big difference when you're in your 20s, I guess. And two, please look up the word universal, right? He's going to give money to the poor for a universal basic income. Well, look up the word universal. I don't know how this program in particular works. I don't know whether it's everybody gets the same basic income sent to them, or whether, I've seen some programs that design a universal basic income, like along the lines of, well, everybody should have at minimum this amount of income, and if you don't have it, we will provide it to you. But others, I guess, could be make their program universal and saying we're going to give this money to everybody equally. That's been an interesting approach that's underpinned a lot of Social Security theory since the beginning. Anyway, so he's 27. Secondly, look up the word universal. Thirdly, we haven't been bankrupt for years. He is the mayor of Stockton, California, as it turns out. We haven't been bankrupt for years, and they're actually, he says, the second most fiscally healthy city in the state of California, which is something about which they can surely be proud if they were at one point bankrupt. Fourthly, by the way, and really honestly this was the gut punch, should belong at the end, but this is where he put it. Number 4, it is, this program, philanthropically funded. It's not taxpayer money that he's just handing out to anybody. It's philanthropically funded. And so, well, who the hell are you to get in the way of these philanthropists deciding, hey, I would like to give some of my money away in a certain way, and, we're all for that. Freedom and whatnot, right? You conservative people. Fifth, the majority of people are, in fact, struggling in this economy, and we have to deal with that. That's just the bottom line, and this is one approach to doing it. So a nice answer, the polite one, the politically correct one, lot more effective, say, than my own answer to Chuck Woolery, which was essentially, here's a headline about a game show host crapping his pants about giving away free money. I've never seen anything quite like that. You can't just give money away for nothing. People won't appreciate the value of it. How are they going to learn the value of work if you don't connect, let's say, giving away free money to the willingness to, engage in sexual double entendre on camera in exchange for gifts and prize money? That's the way people are supposed to get their universal basic income. If we just give money away, where will we get people willing to go on television game shows? Are you trying to disrupt the television game show industry? So I don't really know what would get Chuck Woolery mad about anything. The guy's had a pretty nice life, I imagine, living on the game show host gravy train for whatever. I'm sure it's not worth as much as we all imagine it to be. But well, I'll tell you what, it's worth more than this podcast. I can tell you that right now. Anyway, I just thought that was an odd thing for Chuck Woolery or anybody, really, to take up. But, whatever, man, freedom or whatever. And, okay, so that's what he's decided to do with his day. Much more important stuff out there, I'm positive. If we just look around and try and find it, whether on Twitter or in Pocket, I'll remind myself shortly, I am sure, of some of the more important stories. Let's go to Pocket. You know who's had a good piece today? You'll never believe it. Brian Beutler. And I've actually read it this time, so now I really want to share it with you. Usually I'm just referring to the fact that he has written a good piece, and I haven't read it all the way through and don't have time to do so. But I think he makes some great points here today, which are good points of follow-up on lots of things that we've been saying that... by we, I mean me, because I've been saying them, but also Greg, because he also has been saying them, and I wanted to say so by name, not just the generic we, but the headlines he's brought us over the past couple of weeks and really stretching back, years at this point. I mean, surely, my recollection is that for me, my first notice, let's say, of the Ornstein book, Worse Than It Looks, or Worse Than It, well, I can't, is it, it's Worse Than It Looks, but basically naming Republicans as the problem came from my reference to it via Greg on this segment on the show. And it's a prominent mention in this piece. It's right along the same vein. So I thought Brian did a great job in summarizing this thing and making some other points and bringing in some good stuff for discussion. Let's take a look at his latest for crooked Republican. Oh, it's under the Republicans vertical here. Boycotting Republicans isn't enough. I mean, I always boycott Republicans, so it's not going to do anything for me. But this is a topic of discussion out there now among conservatives who are never Trumpers in particular, now saying, yeah, I just need to reflexively cut off Republicans from consideration come election time, and that'll teach them a lesson. But Brian has something to say about that. It has been a vexing decade for an increasingly endangered species of public intellectual, the self-styled anti-partisan. In 2012, the political scientists Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann, who I forgot to mention in this, threw in the towel. Their book, here we are, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, that's the title of the book, not a comment on the book itself, laid the blame for the increasing dysfunction of America's political system at the feet of the Republican Party, where it belongs, which they admitted had become, quote, an insurgent outlier, ideologically extreme, contemptuous of the inherited social and economic policy regime, scornful of compromise, unpersuaded by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. They rejected, at great professional risk, the Washington Catechism that defines centrism as a wandering midpoint between wherever Democrats and Republicans happen to stand at any given moment. Of course, we know that to be a problem because, midpoint between two relatively stable parties, both of whom accept broadly the capital letters Washington consensus, fine. Middle of the road is centrism. Midpoint between the two would represent some centrism. We became, that became ingrained in our national political thinking. And you know what? I mean, this sort of thing comes up all the time. It's just something that was always true, coincidentally, really true. And so therefore we came to, because it always remained largely true, we took it to be a truism, and it isn't. Like, for instance, I don't know, a good parallel would be reasons to learn the rules behind something. Well, what is centrism? It's the midpoint between the two parties. Well, that's true when the two parties are of, normal extraction. But what happens when one of them flies out of orbit and is, so fringy and extreme? Does it make any sense to define centrism as the literal midpoint between center leftism and radical rightism? No, it doesn't. The midpoint still remains somewhere between center leftism and center rightism. You don't have to move the center along with the migrating political party, but we became, that was ingrained in us. We were told that the midpoint is centrism. I mean, even the name has it it's right in the name, centrism, the center locus of all this stuff. But you got to learn how rules really work in order to extract a better definition of centrism. Like I said, it reminds me of things, stupid things like it becoming ingrained in people's minds that you can't do anything in the Senate without 60 votes. Well, you see, that's because you got the ability to filibuster, and cloture requires 60 votes, but you're not really passing the item itself. The truth is that the underlying measure still only needs a majority of votes, and even things like that. Oh, so you mean 50, so you can pass it with 50 votes? Well, not exactly. Oh, so you mean 51. It has to be a clear majority, 51 votes, or 50 plus the vice president. I see what you mean. It takes 51 votes to pass anything in the House or in the Senate. Well, again, see, what it actually says is a majority. So a majority vote should do it. So if there's no filibuster, or if you're able to invoke cloture, or if the filibuster is prohibited by statute or whatever, the thing is, you'll then head to a vote, and if it gets 49 votes in favor, but only 48 votes against, and everyone else either abstains from voting or is absent that day, but just simply refuses to cast a vote, well, that's a majority. It passes. There's nothing that says anywhere that 51 votes is the answer. The rule is majority. You've used shorthand incorrectly to come to a faulty conclusion about what is true here. At bottom, a majority vote is, and I know that takes longer to say than 50 or 51 or 60 for that matter, but the reality is it requires a majority vote. And, I know we've spent 10 minutes paring down to an explanation of why 49 will work, and people have at that point rolled their eyes and moved on. Same thing going on here. Centrism isn't the midpoint between whatever two pieces of crap you want to throw at me. Centrism is centrism. It's it's the midpoint as between what we've traditionally seen in the country and haven't seen in the last couple of decades. So it's long since fallen out of favor as tradition of a center left and a center right party. In fact, plenty of people would argue with the characterization of the Democratic Party as center left, and would say, it's exhibited the characteristics of a center right party for much longer, or at least much bigger part of, some would say, their lifetimes than there has been a center left bent to it. But okay, that's not the argument we're really having. Back to Brian here, though. They rejected, at great professional risk, Ornstein and Mann did, the Washington Catechism, and that's a great way of putting it, that defines centrism as the wandering midpoint between wherever Democrats and Republicans happen to stand at any given moment. 6 years later, the self-styled anti-partisans Jonathan Rauch and Benjamin Wittes, whose name keeps coming up on this program, have reluctantly reached the same conclusion. In other words, the hippies were right, and then Ornstein and Mann figured out that the hippies were right, and then Rauch and Wittes figured out that Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann were right, but to hell with the hippies, probably, in their minds. But they feel safe in standing with Ornstein and Mann. Whatever. The Republican Party, as an institution, has become a danger to the rule of law and the integrity of our democracy, they argue in The Atlantic. That in their Boycott the GOP piece, which I think Greg mentioned the other day. So that's the big line here. The Republican Party as an institution has become a danger to the rule of law and the integrity of our democracy, which is a big deal, and people brush it off perhaps as political hyperbole, but it's worth keeping in mind. It's the MS-14, I guess we'll call them, of American politics, or really of American anything. I mean, why not simply regard the Republican Party, if that's true, as a gang operation? Do we think it's because they're not extreme enough? They don't murder people the way street gangs do? Can I just diverge for just a second and bring up another tweet that grabbed my eye this morning? I didn't count on connecting these two, but as I make that point and say, well, now that's just a wild accusation to say they're basically a gang of street thugs that murder people. Well, Orrin Hatch doesn't, I don't think, go around murdering people, but he does, in fact, of course, defend people who beat the crap out of spouses successively, by the way. But okay, still, even that doesn't reach the low. And am I talking about like Godfather style, look who's being naive at this point, right? Senators don't have people killed. All right, fine. No, I'm not even making that point. I grabbed Shannon Watts's tweet this morning. Shannon Watts, of course, founder of Mom's Demand, the anti-gun violence operation, just pointing out that she's retweeting someone else's news story here from the LA Times about Elliot Rodger, the killer who committed the massacre in Isla Vista back in 2014. That's the Santa Barbara, right? Was that do I have the right to the neighborhood there? But you went up and shot up the college campus in 2014. It says here, according to the link to the LA Times here, or rather according to the tweet, that he was part of the alt-right, new research shows. And that makes some sense. But of course, you remember that his act predated the widespread recognition of the term alt-right. But he met all the definitions, even right down to the weird connection to like pickup artistry. And I always felt that there was sort of a weird thread that ran from him through the rest of the alt-right as well. And I guess now there's some research of some kind that we're all supposed to respect because it was done by people who organize their thoughts better than I do on the radio. Says, yeah, okay, he actually did have some serious alt-right connections. Shannon points out here in this excerpt that she takes from the LA Times, I guess here, the report counts the killer, that is Elliot Rodger, among 13 alt-right killers whose actions left 43 people dead and more than 60 injured since 2014. And I guess if they were ever somehow to be able to convincingly connect the guy who perpetrated the Mandalay Bay shooting in Las Vegas, well, those totals more than double. But yeah, the perpetrators, by the way, this quote notes, were all men and most were under 30 years of age. All participated in the far-right ecosystem that defines the alt-right. I guess we really need to spend some time on this LA Times article at some point, too. But between the ones that we know about recently and things stretching back a couple of years, Elliot Rodger, this this kid the neo-Nazi who shot his ex-girlfriend's parents here in Virginia not that long ago, the killer who rammed his car into the crowd in Charlottesville, many others, of course, perhaps a little bit lesser known, but stringing them all together. I mean, well, what party is it that the alt-right at least associate themselves with? I know lots of people inside the Republican Party like to exclude them from any formal membership or any formal recognition, but we know where those chickens roost, okay? And that's them. Why aren't they a street gang properly considered? Why are they a political party instead? And what difference does it make? Anyway, I mean, I guess we are reluctant to think that about American political parties because same thing. We have this strange, strong tradition of simply not making that comparison because for many, many years, many, many decades, that's most of our modern political era, certainly anyway. But I mean, I guess if you really count things like dramatic reenactments of semi-real events like things from, I don't know, say Gangs of New York. I mean, there was a very clear connection there, if you believe in that dramatization. And I'm not a historian. I'm not a historian enough to tell you whether or not that's a even close to accurate portrayal of the relationship alleged in the movie between the political bosses of Tammany Hall and the street gang bosses as represented in the movie. But, we have other examples from the modern era, just not in this country. And so it couldn't possibly be the case, not in this country. But I mean, the Nazi Party, and that's a term that comes up very frequently these days, certainly started that way in Germany. Well, these guys they don't have political power. You're not going to elect Adolf Hitler to anything. He's just the leader of a gang of street thugs that beat people up. That's not how you rise to political power in a Western democracy like Germany. Or is it? I guess it is. Or, for instance, things organizations we regard here in the United States chiefly as terrorist organizations that are in fact political parties in their own styling. Hamas, Hezbollah, other organizations that we view as terrorist because that's what our newspapers say, which they view as, well, we're a political organization. Sinn Féin and the IRA, if we got to have white people involved with it. Does that not make sense? And we're supposed to excuse all of their terrorist history because it's fun to have parties on St. Patrick's Day or something like that, or everybody's just a friendly Irish person with a lilt to their voice and they'll share their frosted oat cereal with sweet surprises with you if you're nice to them. No. This happened. I mean, of course, I'm sure the Palestinian activists out there among the audience yelling and screaming and pointing to Israel and insisting on saying the same things about them. And certainly the case is easy, certainly very easy to make in the early days pre-establishment of the State of Israel, right? The pro-Israel, pro-State of Israel Jewish activists / well, ask the British people about it. Ask Palestinian people, yes, you'll get the same answer. But ask British people of the time, yeah, they're terrorists. And we've heard 100 times over how one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist and vice versa. Just want to kind of throw that out there before getting back eventually to Brian's article. So I thank Shannon for making that point and giving us that tangent. The Republican Party, when we last left off, as an institution, has become a danger to the rule of law and the integrity of our democracy, argue Jonathan Rauch and Benjamin Wittes in The Atlantic. I'm sure they're not willing to go quite as far as I did right now. But, why do we hate terrorists? Not just because they kill people, but because they kill us in particular. That worries us. And, of course, why do terrorists hate us? George W. Bush told us that they hate us for our freedoms. Well, what do we make of a political party that as an institution, one, self-styled anti-partisans like Rauch and Wittes are willing to say have become a danger to the rule of law and the integrity of our democracy. In other words, they hate us for our freedoms. And two, the other wing of which Shannon Watts and the LA Times point out for us are, in fact, murdering people in the streets right now. But MS-13 is the problem. I digress. I now continue with Brian's article. Also, still quoting from Rauch and Wittes here. We're thus driven to believe that the best hope of defending the country from Trump's Republican enablers and of saving the Republican Party from itself, if that's possible or if they even want to be saved, is to vote mindlessly and mechanically against Republicans at every opportunity until the party either rights itself or implodes. Preferably the former. I'm not so sure that I am against it being the latter. But again, I'm a little further out there perhaps than they are. And maybe even a little further out, I guess, than Brian Beutler himself is on this one. Although he makes the very good point that, much more is necessary than simply boycotting them at the ballot box. A point we'll return to after, of course, this upcoming break. There's much more to come in this article, if nothing more for our show. We may consume the rest of our entire lives in this pursuit. Yeah, well, I don't really see why we couldn't simply brand them a street gang and be rid of them, but that's bad news. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Hey, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. We're getting a little further afield than I thought we might, but I think making relatively decent and defensible points. And I don't know. I mean, if you think it's too crazy, it sort of occurred to me during the break as I was saying, how are we to reconcile this sort of thing and the idea of the political parties, or at least one political party, devolving to street gang level, or is it always like that? I mean, it brought me to mind of my, brief and fleeting study of von Clausewitz stuff, I guess, in college, and just the one phrase that sticks with you from college level Clausewitz, war being defined as the continuation of politics. War is politics by other means, or as they I'm sure it was put a little bit more eloquently in the text, but of course that's the part that stuck with me. So my deep and abiding interest in Karl von Clausewitz, right? War being politics by other means, I guess, means that you're perhaps never far removed from one or the other, and all it takes is, in the modern context, a breakdown of some of the norms which stood as firewalls between the two pursuits. We've done our best to try and separate them in polite society, but I guess it's not working very well for the extremist party. What a surprise that it would be the extremists who break through the norms and firewalls separating war from politics first, and exercise both in the streets. It will be undoubtedly very uncomfortable for any members, certainly our self-styled anti-partisans out there, but really journalists of almost any stripe, to break down that last barrier and simply say, what we're dealing with here is at minimum, if you don't want to simply say the whole Republican Party is just essentially a street gang at this point, because it does strike you as a little bit ridiculous and over the top. Certainly we can maybe draw a better parallel between, IRA and Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin holding itself out very openly as the political arm of the Irish Republican Army, which was a terrorist organization / freedom fighter. Once again, always ask the British on these things. They seem to be mixed up in just so many of those weird freedom fighter terrorist dichotomies from throughout history. It must be their colonialist stance. Anyway, so moving on to cover yet more of this and to give credit where it's due to Brian's thinking. Like Mann and Ornstein before them, Rauch and Witties have put a finger on the cardinal fact of American politics. I think there might be even more cardinal? than this one, but the polite consensus, I think, may coalesce one day around what Brian has to say. Unfortunately, their prescription for a voting booth boycott of Republican politicians is inadequate. And you could well imagine that would be the case if you really were dealing with an IRA Sinn Féin organization that would just shoot you down in the streets if you boycotted them at the ballot box. So, unfortunately, that prescription inadequate. There is more to politics than elections, and nobody understands this better than the leaders of the Republican Party that Rauch and Wittes would like to oust, except perhaps Karl von Clausewitz. I added that. Defeating Republicans at the polls is, of course, a precondition for ending the country's slide into right-wing authoritarianism, but Republicans have been defeated before without being chastened. Because, of course, they're not primarily a political party. They're, in fact, a street gang, and they realize that power can be had and exercised in places other than elected office. Anyway, to reverse this alarming anti-democratic trend, the modern Republican Party's style of politics, that is to say, resort to street thuggery, must be made anathema. And you would think that would be easier to make anathema. But what is really a problem, actually, the real anathema for us is regarding the party's activities properly and seeing them properly as a street gang rather than a genteel political organization, sewing circle, or a bunch of friendly old folks who get together for caucuses every once in a while. Brian continues, that won't happen without a large-scale civic censure of political actors and institutions, like the GOP, that reject empiricism and equality, attack mediating arbiters of authority, and embrace propaganda and bad faith argument as ordinary brickbats of political war. I'll add here, or simply murder their political opponents because they read about it on Reddit and it seemed like it was a cool thing to do, and besides which, you're going to shoot yourself at the end anyway, so no consequences, YOLO, LOL, nothing matters. But again, I read too much into it. In practice, it would be hard to distinguish between an election in which independent voters, quote, boycotted one party, and a standard wave election in which one party has enthusiasm on its side, one does not, and voters swing to the former. Nobody really conceived of it as a boycott at the time, but this is essentially what happened during President George W. Bush's second term. The country grew exhausted by and ashamed of Bush's foreign policy, which included one war launched on the basis of mass deception and a global torture regime, both things which our mediating arbiters of authority were unwilling to characterize properly for the rest of us. The global economy collapsed. That was also a big deal. Democrats won 2 successive landslides, amassing congressional supermajorities, though Republicans did everything they could to withhold the awarding of the properly won congressional supermajority in the body in which it mattered the most, the Senate, by withholding their agreement to the seating of Al Franken for 6 months, and then almost holding out until finally the death of Ted Kennedy, et cetera, et cetera. Those of us familiar with the chronology and history of the passage of the Affordable Care Act will remember that very well. Bush left office a political outcast, his Republicans decimated. But they, quite wisely, it turns out, didn't respond to these back-to-back referenda as if a large majority of the country would boycott them indefinitely. Instead, they understood that subsequent elections would be referenda on the country's new political leaders, not its old ones. Rather than adopt the political style with mass appeal, they became even more reactionary. They committed themselves to sabotaging President Barack Obama and congressional Democrats in order to shorten their own climb, back to political power. How so? He writes it out here. After years of engaging enthusiastically in corruption and fiscal profligacy, Obama-era Republicans, now in the minority, I would add, adopted a pose of rectitude and austerity. Anyone who had been paying attention knew these were just poses. And you did. I saw you all knowing it. Their immediate jettisoning of Dick Cheney's deficits don't matter ethos and overnight embrace of hawkish budget rhetoric was nakedly insincere. The deficit peacocks, etc., to which Joan often refers and which Greg reminded of us of earlier. The embrace, I'm sorry, I'll just begin the sentence again so we get the place again. Their immediate jettisoning of Dick Cheney's deficits don't matter ethos and overnight embrace of hawkish budget rhetoric was nakedly insincere, but was nevertheless accepted in good faith by nearly the entire political elite. Oops. Just this week, in an otherwise astute assessment of Republican base voters, Axios' Jonathan Swan asserted that Trump, quote, has moved the party away from decades of orthodoxy on deficits. As if such an orthodoxy had existed in the post-Reagan era. As if Republicans' re-embrace of expansionary fiscal policy after reclaiming power weren't completely foreordained. Republicans spent the full 8 years of the Obama presidency making arguments they didn't believe, claiming to be outraged about things that didn't really outrage them, fabricating controversy out of things they knew to be uncontroversial. They spent 4 years pretending to believe an attack in Benghazi, Libya, that killed 4 Americans was an historic scandal, eclipsed only by the revelation, which they also didn't really care about, that Obama's Secretary of State used a private email account to do work. When they were rewarded for this plain-as-day bad faith with control of the entire federal government, they immediately forgot about Benghazi, ignored botched operations for which Trump bore responsibility, and continued to use private email and encrypted third-party communications applications with impunity. It's a matter of absolute certainty that if voters boycott Republicans in sufficient numbers to throw control of government to Democrats, Republicans will return to the same playbook. They will feign remorse over having lost their way. Remember the Republican Party autopsy report? Oh yeah, well, these are all the things that we need to do, and we need to reach out to minority voters and stop being so racist, etc. Reince Priebus in charge of that one. Yeah, that lasted no time at all in the Republican Party, and then they installed Priebus as chief of staff for Donald Trump, of all people, who was obviously committed to the exact opposite, and he was drummed out of office in 6 months there, too. I guess they're really just not committed to that. So where were we? They will feign remorse over having lost their way, then demand credulity from the public when they insist they genuinely care about deficits, that the next Benghazi is a real scandal, that every downward tick of the stock market should be laid at the feet of the Democratic president. Alongside that, they will continue engaging in partisan attacks on any mediating institution, whether the Congressional Budget Office or the FBI or journalism, and for that matter, that confounds their political ambitions. The Republican Party isn't going to right itself or implode unless that kind of unprincipled behavior is rendered toxic. It should be considered disreputable outside of movement conservatism to work for Fox News or for the same RNC that propped up Trump and then backed Roy Moore in Alabama. Pause for just a second here to remember all the journalist types, Jake Tappers and others, who for many years said, no, we can't attack members of the press who just simply happen to work for Fox News. I don't know whether I properly laid it at the feet of Jake Tapper or not. Can't recall specifically, but this was a thing that famous White House correspondents did very frequently. No, it's not fair. My colleague, who was it that worked for Fox News that they were, they were defending. I'm thinking of like Major Garrett here, right? But people who move back and forth between other news organizations too, or who maybe move from one organization to Fox. And no, he's a committed and professional journalist, and you can't judge him by the rest of what's on the Fox News channel and all this stuff. Yeah, I know, right? Well, that didn't work out very well, and long term, it never made any sense. The agenda there is obvious to everybody, and just like working in the Trump White House will eventually corrupt you and steal your soul and turn you into a Trumpista, like it or not, no matter what a record of integrity you might have entered the White House with, or perhaps you're a wife beater and you had none, but whatever. And they'll manufacture one for you, and then you'll lose that too. Same thing is going on at Fox News, and we ought to recognize it. Brian continues, if you conduct yourself the way Devin Nunes has conducted himself as Trump's agent atop the House Intelligence Committee, you should have to worry, or you shouldn't, just have to worry about losing your seat, but about your name being dirt. But of course that doesn't happen in this modern context anymore. Donald Trump's name is dirt, but not to people who knew him as the really smart rich guy from television. And, of course, even if it was shown that he was a fraud on television, it didn't matter because I've wanted to tell the Eastern establishment to go F itself since forever, and he'll say it. And so, he tells it like it is. No, I mean, he screams like you do. He doesn't tell it like it is. You weren't telling it like it is. It's just that your BS matches his BS because he's just like you and you're just like him. He doesn't deserve any of the money he's got. And, well, frankly, you don't deserve that money either, so don't worry about it. But okay, you're just two deplorables in the same basket, thinking that each one of the other ones, tells it like it really is, when it's just two idiot deplorables in a basket agreeing with one another. Stay in the basket. I know where I can send it. Is it a hand basket? I've got an idea. Anyway, so again, back to Brian here. If you conduct yourself the way Devin Nunes does, you shouldn't just have to worry about losing your seat because someone's going to boycott you at the ballot box. You should worry about ever being able to work in legitimate America again. But it doesn't work that way because wingnut welfare, et cetera, et cetera. I, Brian says, can dimly envision how that might happen, but hold almost no hope that it actually will. The institution with the most direct power to shape post-Trump Republican politics will be the Democratic Party. We might be in trouble there. Obama came to power having promised to transcend partisanship and amid multiple national crises. For these reasons and others, he determinedly avoided the kind of retrospective inquiries that might have boxed Republicans into accounting for their Bush-era political sins, for how they contributed to corruption, the salesmanship of the Iraq War, the torture regime, the financial crisis, and so on. Those all things, of course, that we came to put in the box of looking backward, because that was the box that Obama handed us. We don't look backward. We're looking forward. We're moving forward. These looking backwards is only going to hold us back. But, well, okay, you recognize where I'm going. No point in lingering on it any longer. Many of us thought that backward-looking examination was the only way to make these things so toxic that they were anathema, and we didn't find ourselves in the very next Republican regime not only reviving the same practices, but worse. Whatever you could cram in under the Republican playbook of LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. There's no rules for anyone. So much the worse, I guess, if you're doing it under the leadership of someone as ludicrous and idiotic as Donald Trump. That's the worst possible combination I could concoct. Although had I done so ahead of time, it would have been rejected by, it wouldn't have made a good science fiction movie. No one would believe the script. But marrying the Republican approach to the person who is the most shameless liar and serial exaggerator in the world is just, as toxic as it could possibly get. Anyway, imagine that. We identified this whole thing even before we coined the gimmitarianism line, and gimmitarianism here preceded the Trump era, but preceding gimmitarianism was it's okay if you are a Republican, which we all know from online shorthand, IOKIYAR, it's okay if you are a Republican. You can get away with anything. They'll just post hoc come up with a rationalization for whatever stupid thing you did that you just finished bashing Democrats for. You're caught doing the same thing. Once again, it turns out to be projection, and we point out the hypocrisy, and well, whatever. We'll get away with it anyway. Imagine taking that, knowing that about Republicans, and then marrying that to, in the personality of Donald Trump, who was most famous, even in latter days, on Twitter, for his ridiculous braggadocio. That's a pretty dangerous combination. Why we didn't see that coming, I'll never know. Well, we did, but we voted the other way. Big deal. You and I boycotted him at the ballot box. Felt a lot of good it did us. Republicans do things a bit differently. Brian continues. When Republicans gain power, even against the will of the voting public, they aim to crush their political enemies. Obama's signature legislative initiative transferred billions and billions of dollars from blue states to what later became Trump states to help the citizens of the latter afford health care. Months after it passed, Republicans captured governments in multiple swing states where they set about dismantling public sector unions, suppressing the Democratic vote, and gerrymandering congressional districts to guarantee themselves enduring power whether their constituents approved of their governance or not. In December, just a year after losing the national popular vote by a substantial margin, Republicans designed their signature legislative initiative to inflict maximal punishment on the Democratic voters of high-tax blue states. And remember this, now I'm hearkening back, since we've been talking about George W. Bush so often, hearkening back to the days of, just after the 2000 non-recount, and the closest margin ever, and it decided in the Supreme Court, and yada, yada, and briefly, this idea that he was certainly going to have to tack to center. He was absolutely going to have to govern as a moderate, because how else could you govern this country so closely divided and with so many people questioning the legitimacy of his presidency, right? And they didn't even acknowledge that pre-9/11. Post-9/11, forget about it. But there you go. They simply approach things differently than we do. They immediately, again, lose the election by historic margins on the popular vote and immediately set out not to govern as moderates, but to govern as radically as possible. And herein inset is a tweet from our friend who tweets as Taniel, of course, and we've got let's see, this observation included in Brian's article here. Summarizing the same situation. While the North Carolina GOP and Virginia GOP have passed or are passing laws to strip election boards of their Democratic majorities, the New Hampshire Republican Party concocts ever new laws to block college students from voting, and Texas lost 3 intentional discrimination lawsuits in 2017 alone. And now I guess we can add to that, although, no, it didn't or post-date this tweet, but maybe there's more in subsequent tweets about the situation in Pennsylvania, which just sprung on us the other day. Warfare between the parties has been asymmetric, Brian continues, in large part because liberals generally reject these kinds of nakedly anti-democratic power grabs. But Democrats could be more determined, let's say, to win political fights than they are. After Trump, Democrats could adopt a more aggressive approach than they have in the past on the fool me twice principle. They could abolish the filibuster, expedite legislation to widen the franchise, and reform campaign finance laws, right Mitch McConnell's theft of a Supreme Court seat, and conduct oversight of the institutions of government Trump corrupted. They could set up a commission to examine the role of propaganda in American media and report out how and why, under Trump, the Republican Party entered a de facto partnership with hostile foreign intelligence to influence American politics. I think they can and should do all of these things and more, so long as they can be done on majoritarian and representative bases. But to truly marginalize the GOP's political style would require a level of cooperation from many conservatives that doesn't exist, and a level of buy-in from generally nonpartisan institutions, the media, the bureaucracy, corporate America, and civil society, which have proven ill-equipped to defend themselves from Republican efforts to co-opt or discredit them. And that is a big problem. And, of course, we'd need all of them in order to point out that, we've been federally funding an MS-14 street gang all these years, sending them matching funds for their candidates or funding their national conventions. Imagine the federal government picking up the bill for a national Crips convention or something like that. Oh, yeah, well, we're putting together our platform, and we deserve equal time. Imagine them, or MS-13 for that matter, demanding rebuttal time to the president's State of the Union address. He was attacking us directly, by the way, and we are a political party, or so we consider ourselves. I mean, it works when the Republican Party says they're a political party, though they're a street gang, and their people are murdering people left and right. Well, okay, it wouldn't fly. Not without the cooperation of those generally nonpartisan institutions, which will never be party to this. Corporate America, Brian adds, has giddily joined a Banana Republic-style public relations campaign to thank dear leader Trump for his corporate tax cuts and portray them as a boon to workers. Mainstream journalists are so petrified of bad faith accusations of liberal bias that many of them genuinely can't grasp how hostile the American right is to the vocation of journalism, or how to report on bad faith in the public square more generally. The conservative writer Jonah Goldberg, who has been pretty critical of Trump over the past couple of years, nevertheless still posits an equivalence of venality between Trump-era Republicans and Obama-era Democrats. A quote to illustrate it: putting aside the specific arguments, conservatives saw plenty of abuses and violations, from the IRS scandals and Benghazi to the Iran deal, he wrote recently. Obama said many times he couldn't unilaterally implement the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program because he wasn't a king. Then he did it anyway. Goldberg asserts the equivalence with specific arguments set aside because these abuses and violations occurred only in the conservative imagination and thus don't stand up to specific arguments. As liberal writer Kevin Drum explained, the IRS, quote, scandal was a minor screw-up that affected both parties and certainly had nothing to do with Obama anyway. Benghazi was a tragedy, but not a scandal in any reasonable sense of the word. The Iran deal was the Iran deal. And getting new legal advice on DACA is hardly some unprecedented norm violation. It's up to the courts to decide if an executive order is legal, and so far no court has even taken up the question of DACA, let alone ruled against it. Which is all to say, even if post-Trump Democrats refuse to turn the page, other powerful institutions and individuals will do so happily. In a world where Sean Spicer, seriously, remains respectably employable, corporate America loves regressive tax cuts, mainstream news outlets refuse to make pariahs of people who seek their destruction, and the cult of false equivalence remains the analytical foundation of political journalism, voters can boycott Republicans in historic numbers, only to watch Republicans return to power unreformed, and maybe even worse, I would add, a few years later. It's very difficult to imagine them being any worse, but it's easy to imagine them returning as just the same people a few years later. Very easy to do, very simple to do. Glad Brian put some effort into it and organized his thoughts in ways that make it easy for us to get those points across, even with all those amazing tangents that I went off on. And by amazing, I mean I'm amazed that I allowed myself to do them. Whether they made any sense or not will largely be up to you, our audience. Please let me know what you thought about that, and whether we ought not to engage in such nonsense in the future, or whether that's in fact exactly what you listen to the show for. Anyway, I'll tell you what else you listen to the show for. It's interesting takes on items in the news, and hopefully more than one or two of them. That's why we have here on Netroots Radio Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next to round up all these other stories I didn't yet get to touch, and I'll threaten you with for our Friday show. But for now, we hand things over. Oh, Jake Tapper makes the roundup in this one. Look at this, starting off in the Bistro Cafe. Jake Tapper rants about the moral degradation and eroding lines of decency emanating from the White House. What a remarkable thing for him to do after today's show. On the rest of the menu, the Department of Justice. Not the Justice Putnam, but the real Department of Justice, which isn't actually a department about justice, shut down a Ukrainian-launched cyber crime ring that caused more than $530 million in losses. Wow. New York architect Vijay Dugal is threatening to sue Trump for stealing his solar border wall idea. That's funny.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Walton.
Well, good luck to you, VJ. Also here, after losing in court over illegal gerrymanders, Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania and North Carolina now resorting to desperate judicial branch coups. And then they'll move to the chef's table to reveal that Russian trolls used Tumblr even, to undermine Clinton as far back as 2015, and much, much more.